The sun hung low over the dry plains, painting the horizon with a faint orange glow that bled into the endless sea of sagebrush and dust. The year was 1887, and the town of Red Hollow lay quiet beneath the dying light, its wooden shacks leaning like tired men after a long day. Wind whispered through the cracked signs of the general store, the saloon, and the old church on the hill, carrying with it the scent of dust, smoke, and something long-forgotten grief. On the far edge of that town stood a ranch once proud, now silent. The fence was broken in places, the barn roof sagging, and the fields where cattle used to roam were now just stretches of dry earth. Inside the small, lonely house, a man sat in his rocker, staring at a framed portrait. His name was Illy McGraw, and once he'd been known as one of the best ranchers this side of the Missouri. But life had taken his fire. The fever that had swept through the plains 2 winters ago had claimed his wife, Clara, leaving him hollow. Every night Illy would light the same old lamp, pour himself a glass of whiskey, and sit before Clara's portrait. Her smile, painted by a local artist, seemed to follow him in every shadow. It wasn't the smile of a woman gone. It was alive, haunting, and tender. That portrait was his last tie to the world he'd lost. The ranch hands had long gone. Work had slowed. The cattle dwindled. Illy barely spoke to anyone. Folks in town said he'd lost his mind to loneliness. And maybe, in some way, he had. Days passed without much change, until the morning she arrived. It was early spring when a wagon rolled up the dirt road to his ranch. The sound of wooden wheels crunching gravel broke through the stillness of the morning. The horses stopped before the porch, and a woman stepped down. She wore a plain brown dress, her boots dusted from travel. Her face was shadowed beneath a wide, brimmed hat, but her eyes, when they lifted, were calm, searching. In her hands she carried something wrapped in burlap and tied with string. She walked slowly toward the porch, the wind tugging at her dress. Illy, hearing the approach, stepped out, his old rifle resting against the doorframe, though he made no move to reach for it. The woman placed the bundle on the porch rail. With careful fingers she unwrapped it, and there it was again. A portrait. Illy froze. It was Clara, the same soft eyes, the same gentle smile, but not the same painting. This one was different, new, somehow alive with color and warmth that his own faded portrait had long since lost. He could see the brush strokes, deliberate and tender, as though someone had known Clara personally, deeply. But that was impossible. The woman spoke softly, though Illy could barely register her words. Her voice was low, respectful. She had come, she said, to offer help. She had no family, no home, but could cook and clean. All she asked was a place to work. She said she'd brought something of his wife's memory to him, a gift she felt led to deliver. Illy didn't understand. He didn't even answer. He only looked at the painting, then at her. The resemblance, no, not to Clara, but to something about her spirit, made his breath catch. He finally nodded, emotion slow and uncertain. The woman smiled faintly and stepped inside. Her name, he would learn later, was Mara. But for now, she was just a stranger with a portrait. That evening, for the first time in years, smoke rose from the ranch's chimney. The smell of bread drifted through the halls, soft music of pots and pans breaking the silence that had ruled too long. Illy stayed outside, sitting on the porch steps, the twilight deepening around him. He felt uneasy, even guilty, that another presence moved through Clara's kitchen. But the warmth that had returned to the house stirred something long buried, a flicker of life he thought he'd lost forever. When he stepped inside later, he saw the new portrait propped up on the mantel beside the old one. The 2 faces of Clara, one painted years ago, one freshly brushed by this wandering woman, seemed to meet in the lamplight. their smiles overlapping in eerie harmony. It sent a shiver through him. Mara moved quietly in the kitchen, her steps light, her voice humming a tune under her breath. She didn't look up when he entered. She didn't ask questions. She simply worked as if she had always been there. Illy sat down at the table, watching her hands as they moved. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair tied back, her movements steady. He noticed the way she paused once, fingers tracing the rim of a cup, almost as if remembering something or someone. That night, when he finally went to bed, Illy found sleep hard to come by. The scent of bread lingered. The house creaked differently, as though it had awakened after years of slumber. And outside, the wind carried a whisper through the dry fields, a whisper that sounded strangely like Clara's laughter. For the first time since she'd passed, Illy didn't drink before bed. He simply lay there, eyes open, listening to the sound of a stranger moving softly in the kitchen below. He couldn't explain it, but he felt something shifting, like the earth itself turning after a long winter. Morning came with a golden sunrise spilling through the cracks in the window. Illy woke early, hearing the clatter of dishes again. He looked down from the stairs and saw Mara already at work, the light catching in her hair. For a fleeting moment, he almost mistook her silhouette for Clara's. He turned away quickly, ashamed of the thought. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Mara cooked, cleaned, and tended to the house as though she'd been born to it. She never asked for payment, only food and a place to stay. Illy said little, but began to watch her with curiosity he couldn't quite admit to himself. The portrait she brought stayed on the mantel, and each night he found himself staring at it, wondering who she really was, how she came to have it, and why it felt like Clara's eyes were warmer now, as though they approved. He didn't yet know that this woman's arrival wasn't by chance. She had come carrying more than a painting. She carried secrets that would soon unravel everything he thought he knew about his wife, about love, and about himself. And as dusk fell one evening, and Mara stepped out to fetch water, Illy noticed something strange on the back of the portrait's frame. Something carved faintly into the wood. His wife's initials, and another set right beside them. M.R. He frowned, his heart beating a little faster. Who was Mara, really? And what did she know about Clara that he didn't? The wind howled outside the window, carrying with it the promise of something coming, something that would change everything forever. The days grew longer in Red Hollow, and so did the strange quiet that hung over Illy McGraw's ranch. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now breathed again. Smoke rose from the chimney every morning. The scent of warm bread, stew, and herbs drifted across the porch, mingling with the dust and sun. But beneath that new rhythm, something deeper stirred, a quiet unease that Illy couldn't name. Mara worked with steady devotion. She mended curtains, scrubbed the old wooden floors, and even coaxed the dying garden back to life. Illy would find her there often at dawn, kneeling in the dirt with her sleeves rolled up, humming softly while her fingers pressed seeds into the soil. There was something almost sacred about the way she moved, as if she were not just cleaning a house, but restoring a soul. Still, Illy kept his distance. His grief was an old, stubborn wound that resisted healing. But he watched her from the corner of his eye, the way the light followed her, the way the air seemed different when she entered a room. She never spoke much, P.S.T., mentioned the Olotre T-O-L-E-R-A-T-E, should be R-O-U-G-H-T better. Yet every time Illy's gaze drifted to it, he felt that same stirring, the two sets of initials carved faintly on the back, C, M, and M-R. He tried not to think about it, but the question gnawed at him like a splinter under the skin. Weeks passed, the ranch began to change. The barn roof was patched, the fences repaired, the cattle fed again. A sense of order returned, and with it the faintest trace of peace. But peace has its own way of testing a man. One evening, as the sun bled red across the plains, Illy stood by the mantel, staring at the portrait once more. The lamplight flickered, casting shadows over Clara's painted face, and there, beneath the familiar softness of her smile, he began to notice something he'd never seen before. The brushwork around the collar, the edge of her hair, the faint blending of color. It was all different, newer than the rest. Almost as if someone had retouched the painting recently, he turned to the second portrait, the one Mara had brought, and his heart gave a strange, heavy thud. The resemblance was too perfect, not just in likeness, but in life. The same hand had painted both. He could feel it, the same rhythm, the same emotion in the strokes. But Clara had died years ago, and Mara, she was too young to have known her. Too much of a stranger to carry her likeness so faithfully. That night, Illy couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the creak of the old house, the wind rattling against the windows. He could hear Mara moving below, quiet and purposeful, as if she too couldn't rest. At one point, her shadow passed his door. She was carrying something in her hands, a small box, wooden, old. She moved toward the fireplace and lingered there. The next morning the box was gone. Mara said nothing, as always, but the house felt different again, still warm, but tinged with something unseen, like the calm before a storm. Illy went about his chores, though his thoughts refused to settle. He found himself remembering small things about Clara, her laughter, her letters, her secret sketches tucked into books. She used to paint too, though never portraits, just wildflowers, skies, and the occasional figure seen from behind. She had said once that people's faces were too heavy with truth to capture on canvas. So who, then, had painted her so perfectly? By noon the sun burned bright and cruel. Illy went to the barn to fetch a tool, but stopped when he noticed something resting on the hay bale, a sketchbook, open to a half-finished drawing. He picked it up carefully. It was Clara again, the same face, the same gentle eyes, but this time the artist had drawn her with someone beside her. A woman turned slightly away, long hair, a familiar curve to the jaw. Mara. Illy felt his chest tighten. The signature at the bottom confirmed what he feared and didn't understand. M.R. The same initials carved into the back of the portrait. He stared at the drawing for a long while, his pulse heavy in his ears. The world seemed to tilt a little, the barn walls closing in. He placed the sketchbook back down slowly and stepped outside, where the wide plains stretched endless and silent. The horizon shimmered in the heat. That evening, as he walked back to the house, he found Mara in the yard, tending to the garden again. The sun was dipping low, casting her in gold and shadow. She looked up once, and for the first time Illy saw something flicker across her face, an expression that wasn't calm or kind, but haunted. Like a woman carrying something too heavy for words, he turned away, uneasy, and went inside. Night fell quick and cold. The wind rattled the shutters, and the old boards groaned as though the house remembered things it shouldn't. Illy sat by the fire again, his whiskey untouched, his eyes fixed on the twin portraits on the mantel. The old and the new, the wife he'd loved, and the stranger who had walked into his life with her likeness. In the silence the flames hissed and cracked. For a moment Illy could almost swear he saw the expression on the painted Clara change, her eyes softening, her smile turning sad. He blinked, and the illusion vanished. But something deep inside him whispered that it wasn't an illusion at all. He rose and went to the mantel, his hand trembling as he lifted the new portrait. The back of the frame felt rough beneath his fingers, the carving faint but certain. MR, he traced it slowly, his breath catching, and beneath the initials, faintly scratched into the wood, were a few more words nearly invisible. Forgive her. Illy froze. Forgive who, and for what? The fire popped sharply, snapping him back. He turned toward the kitchen, but it was empty now. The lamp still burned low, and the scent of herbs lingered. He called out softly, but there was no answer. He checked the back door. Open, swinging gently in the night wind. Outside, the moon hung pale over the plains. The air was still. Only the faintest trail of footprints led away from the porch, down toward the edge of the pasture. He followed them until they disappeared into the dark. By morning, Mara was gone. Only the faint echo of her presence remained in the house, the scent of bread, the hum of something unfinished, and that single word carved into the wood. Forgive. Illy stood in the quiet, the new portrait beside the old, both staring back at him through the morning light. His heart was heavy, confused, yet drawn toward something he didn't understand, something that tied his wife and this woman together across time and silence. And far off, down by the edge of the field, he saw a glimmer of fabric caught on the fence, a torn piece of Mara's shawl, fluttering like a ghost in the wind. Whatever story she carried, it wasn't over yet. No dialogue, just rich, emotional storytelling in the tone and pacing of viral Wild West love story videos, poetic, slow, burning, and mysterious. Wild West love story. She came with a portrait of his late wife, asked to work in his kitchen, and changed his life forever. Chapter 3, The Letter in the Attic. The morning Mara vanished, Illy McGraw stood at the threshold of his quiet ranch house, staring out across the golden plains that rolled endlessly toward the mountains. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint echo of something unfinished, like a story paused mid-sentence. The kitchen was clean. The fire in the stove had gone cold. Only the faint scent of herbs lingered, clinging to the wood like a ghost of her presence. On the mantel, the two portraits sat side by side, his late wife, Clara, and the second painting that Mara had brought with her. The morning light made them shimmer, and for the first time Illy noticed something else, a small discoloration near the corner of the new portrait's frame, a loose seam of paint, almost like it had been sealed, hiding something beneath, but Illy didn't touch it. Not yet. He spent the day searching. He followed the faint trail of Mara's footprints as far as he could before they disappeared into the dry, cracked earth near the creek bed. He found nothing, no wagon, no belongings, no signs of struggle, only the wind and the sound of crows circling high above. By nightfall, exhaustion drove him back home. The house, once lively under her care, now felt hollow again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one pressed heavier against the walls, as if the house itself waited for something. Illy felt it too, a pull toward understanding. He lit the lamp and wandered through the rooms, his boots creaking on the worn floorboards. His wife's things still lay where they had always been, her shawl on the chair, her books lined on the shelf. Everything exactly as she had left it years ago. But that night, as the wind rose, something strange happened. A thud echoed from above, soft, distant, the attic. Illy froze, the flame of his lamp flickering. He hadn't been up there in years. He climbed the narrow stairs slowly, the air growing colder as he went. Dust hung thick in the beam of light, swirling like tiny ghosts. The attic door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing the forgotten space, old trunks, stacks of faded letters, and the scent of age and memory. And there, on a small table by the window, lay a box, the same wooden box he'd seen Mara carry that night she moved through the dark. It shouldn't have been there, but it was. Illy set the lamp beside it and lifted the lid. Inside were letters. dozens of them, tied with a faded blue ribbon. His hands trembled as he pulled one free. The handwriting was unmistakable. Clara's. His breath caught. She had written more than he'd ever known. He unfolded the letter carefully. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. It wasn't a letter to him. It was to someone named Mara. The name hit him like a blow. The letters told a story slowly, piece by piece. Clara had once known Mara, years before she met Illy, back in a small town near the border. Mara had been a young girl then, the daughter of a woman Clara had worked for as a painter's assistant. Clara had taken her under her wing, taught her to draw, to see beauty in the world. As he read further, the tone of the letters changed, from mentorship to something deeper. Clara wrote about a promise, about leaving something behind for Mara when the time came. A portrait, a message, a bond that could not be broken by death or distance. Illy sat there for hours, the lamp burning low, reading letter after letter. Each one unraveled another thread of the mystery. Mara had been like a sister to Clara, but there was something else beneath the words, something unsaid, something secret. In the final letter, dated just months before Clara's death, Clara wrote of an illness she'd kept hidden, and of a request she had made of Mara. She had asked her to finish something, a painting, the last portrait, the one that had hung above the mantel all these years. Illy's chest tightened. The truth began to take shape like a shadow forming in fog. Mara had not just brought the second portrait. She had painted part of the first. He rose from the attic, the letters clutched to his chest, his heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. He went to the mantel once more and lifted the original portrait, the one he had stared at for years, the one he thought had captured Clara's spirit so perfectly. He turned it toward the light. Now he saw it, the faint blending of two hands, two hearts, the older brushwork, soft and familiar, and beneath it, the newer, surer strokes that brought Clara's eyes to life again, the same touch that had shaped Mara's portrait. Mara hadn't copied his wife's face. She had finished what Clara had begun. As he held the painting, a page slipped loose from behind the frame. A single folded letter, sealed with wax. His hands shook as he opened it. It was written in Clara's hand again, but this time addressed to him. She spoke of her illness, her fears of leaving him alone, and of a promise she had made to someone who would one day come when he needed her most. She wrote of Mara, how the girl carried a light that could heal the lonely, how she would know when it was time to come. And at the end of the letter, Clara's words struck like a quiet thunder. When she comes, let her stay. She will carry what I could not finish. Illy stood there for a long while, the letter trembling in his grasp. The truth flooded through him like sunrise over the plains. Mara hadn't been a stranger after all. She had been part of Clara's final act of love. He sank into his chair, the weight of years pressing against his shoulders. He thought of Mara's quiet eyes, the way she had moved through the house, like someone reliving old memories, not discovering new ones. She had known Clara's spirit because she had carried it within her. The night deepened, the fire burned low, and outside the wind softened into stillness. But Illy's heart was restless. The truth gave him no peace, only questions. Why had Mara left so suddenly? What burden had she carried that even Clara's love couldn't ease? He looked once more at the torn piece of fabric caught on the fence outside, fluttering like a signal in the moonlight. He knew then what he had to do. Mara had brought him life again, and now it was his turn to find her. He rose before dawn, saddled his horse, and turned toward the empty horizon. Behind him, the house glowed faintly in the first light. The two portraits side by side, his past and his future, waiting in silent witness. The road ahead was long, but his heart was steady. For the first time since Clara's death, Illy McGraw had a purpose again. And far beyond the plains, where the land curved into shadow, a figure moved slowly down a dusty trail, a woman with a worn shawl and a secret she could no longer carry alone. The dawn broke over the plains like a promise. The air shimmered with the pale gold of morning, and Eli McGraw rode out from his ranch with the first light, his horse's hooves stirring the dust of the earth that had held him prisoner for too long. Behind him, the house grew smaller with every stride, the two portraits within watching him go, one painted by love, the other by fate. He rode without a clear direction. Only the wind guided him, the same wind that had carried Mara's scent across his porch, the same wind that had once brushed through Clara's hair. He didn't know where she had gone, but something deep within him whispered that she hadn't gone far. Not yet. The world around him stretched endless and silent. Dry canyons yawned open beneath the rising sun. Rivers cut through the land like old scars, and the ghosts of forgotten towns lay scattered along the horizon. Every trail seemed to lead to memory. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper her name. By midday, he reached the edge of Red Hollow. The town moved with its usual slow rhythm, wagons creaking, children running barefoot down the street, and the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing from afar. But Eli didn't stop. He kept riding east, where the land dipped into wild country, where the prairie met the mountains, and where a person could disappear if they wished. Hours passed, the sun sank lower, the road grew rougher. He came upon a small abandoned homestead, a cabin leaning against the slope of a hill, half wallowed by weeds. Something about it drew him to stop. The door hung open, and through it he saw the remnants of life left behind, an overturned chair, a cold hearth, and on the wall a faint smudge where a painting once hung. Eli dismounted, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. He felt it in his bones before he saw it, a trace of her presence. A scrap of fabric lay near the doorway, the same faded blue as the shawl she had left behind. His chest tightened. She had been there. He knelt beside the fireplace, brushing aside ashes long cold. Beneath them, hidden and nearly turned to dust, he found a folded paper. He lifted it carefully, unfolding it with trembling hands. It wasn't a letter. It was a sketch, a rough drawing, unfinished, but the style was unmistakable. Mara's, it showed a woman standing beside a river, her head bowed, her hands clasped around something pressed to her chest. Beneath the figure, a few faint words were written in charcoal. Where she rests, I will finish it. Eli's breath caught. He looked up toward the distant hills, where the land curved into shadow. A river wound there, thin, silver, winding through the valley like a thread of memory. He mounted again and rode hard toward it. The sun dipped behind the hills as he reached the river's edge. The air grew cool and damp, the scent of pine replacing the dry dust of the plains. The water flowed quietly, carrying with it reflections of the fading light. And there, by the bank, he saw it, a small campfire, recently burned out. Beside it lay a satchel, a bundle of paints, and a folded canvas. He dismounted, his hands trembling as he lifted the edge of the canvas. It was another portrait, half finished, brushed in hurried strokes. Clara again, but this time her eyes weren't looking out toward the viewer, they were turned upward, as if gazing toward something beyond the world. And beside her, faintly sketched, was another figure, a woman with her head bowed, Mara's likeness incomplete. Eli felt the air leave his chest. He sank to his knees by the water, the weight of it all pressing down like stone. The pieces fit together now, the letters, the portraits, the unfinished art. Clara had known her end was near, and in her final act she had entrusted Mara to complete what death had interrupted. But why? Why had Mara left without a word, after bringing his wife's memory back to life? As night settled in, Eli made a small fire of his own and sat beside the water, staring into the flames. The sound of the river filled the silence, steady and eternal. He could almost feel Clara there, in the rustle of the leaves, in the flicker of the firelight. And somewhere beyond that stillness, he could sense Mara too, carrying not just Clara's art, but Clara's heart, in a way he was only beginning to understand. The stars rose high above the plains. The cold crept in. Illy leaned back, the letter still clutched in his hand, and drifted into restless dreams. He dreamed of Clara's voice, soft and far away, of the sound of her laughter echoing in the halls, of her standing at the river's edge, reaching out to someone unseen. When he awoke, the fire was dying, and the horizon was pale with dawn. Across the water he saw movement. A figure small and distant, wrapped in a brown shawl. She moved slowly along the far bank, pausing now and then as if searching for something lost in the current. Illy rose, his pulse quickening, but before he could call out, she turned and vanished into the trees. He knew it was her. He crossed the river, the water biting cold against his legs. On the far bank he found more signs, a trail of footprints leading up a narrow path toward the ridge. He followed them, each step pulling him closer, not just to her, but to the truth that had begun the day she arrived with that portrait in her hands. As he climbed higher, the valley unfolded beneath him. He could see the river winding below, the plains stretching beyond. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine, and in the distance the faint cry of a hawk split the morning air. When he reached the ridge, he found her camp, a small canvas tent, a box of paints, and beside it a wooden cross. The ground around it was freshly turned. He knew before he read the inscription carved into the cross who rested there. Clara McGraw, beloved wife, dreamer, painter. He sank to his knees. He had thought he buried Clara long ago, near the ranch, beneath the willow tree she loved. But here, miles away, was a second grave marked not by sorrow, but by love. And in that moment he understood. Mara hadn't come to his ranch by chance. She had come to finish Clara's last wish, to bring him back to life, to restore what loneliness had taken. And when she saw her task was done, she had returned here, to the place Clara had painted last, the place where her spirit lingered. But there was still one thing left unfinished, the half-painted canvas by the river. Illy turned and saw her again, Mara, standing by the tree line, her eyes wet with both fear and recognition. The sun struck her hair, turning it to gold, and for an instant she looked just as Clara had in the old days, before illness had dimmed her light. The moment hung between them, suspended and silent. And then, like the wind through the grass, she turned and walked deeper into the woods. Illy didn't follow. Yet he knew that the story wasn't finished. Not hers, not Clara's, and not his. He looked back toward the cross, then toward the trail she had taken. The morning light poured across the valley, warm and blinding. Something inside him, grief, love, forgiveness, shifted and settled. The road ahead called to him once more, and as he took his first step after her, the world seemed to breathe again. It's written in the emotional, cinematic tone of viral Wild West love stories, full of mood, imagery, and introspection, with no dialogue. The wind carried the scent of rain down from the mountains that morning. It swept through the valley, brushing over the riverbank, where Illy McGraw stood staring at the cross that bore his wife's name. The wooden marker leaned slightly with age, its carved letters softened by weather and time. Yet beneath the gray sky it seemed to glow faintly, as though Clara's presence had never truly left this place. The land was still, save for the rustle of pines and the murmur of water over stone. Beside the grave lay the remains of Mara's small camp, her paints, brushes, and that unfinished canvas that had haunted Illy since he'd found it. The two figures upon it, Clara and Mara, waited in silence, forever joined by the stroke of the same hand. Illy knelt beside the painting, running his calloused fingers over its edge. The colors were raw, wild, unblended like a storm frozen on the canvas. He could feel the emotion in it, the longing, the grief. Mara's heart had been poured into every stroke. She had painted not for beauty, but for truth. He turned toward the forest, where she had disappeared hours ago. The trail she left behind was faint but visible, pressed grass, broken twigs, footprints light as whispers. He followed them slowly, each step heavy with questions and memories. The forest grew denser as he climbed higher into the hills. Shadows deepened and the scent of pine thickened. He passed the remnants of another campfire, long cold, and a scattering of sketches pinned to a fallen log with small stones. Each drawing was of Clara, her face at different ages smiling, painting, laughing, fading. It was as if Mara had been trying to remember her through art, or perhaps trying to keep her from fading entirely. Illy stopped before one particular sketch. It showed Clara sitting by the river, her hands dipped into the water. Above her, faintly drawn, was a reflection not her own, but Mara's, watching her from across the stream. The meaning struck him deep. They had shared more than friendship. They had shared a bond of love and loss, one that crossed the boundaries of blood and time. Clara had given Mara her trust, and perhaps something even greater, her unfinished heart. As the sky darkened, thunder began to rumble across the horizon. A storm was coming. Illy pressed on through the trees, the wind rising around him. When he finally broke through to the other side of the ridge, he saw her. Mara stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley, her shawl whipping in the wind. Below, the land stretched vast and endless, the river winding like a silver thread through the plains. She stood perfectly still, facing the horizon as if waiting for something only she could see. Illy stopped a few yards away, watching her silhouette against the coming storm. Lightning flashed, painting her in pale light. She looked small and fragile, yet somehow untouchable, like the memory of someone half living, half gone. He thought of the letters, the paintings, the years he had spent locked away inside his grief. He realized then that Mara had carried a different kind of burden. While he had clung to Clara's memory out of sorrow, Mara had carried it out of promise. She had fulfilled her vow, and now she stood at the edge of letting go. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy. The wind howled through the canyons, bending the trees and scattering the sketches from his hands. The world blurred into gray and silver, the storm washing away the dust of years. Illy moved closer. The earth beneath his boots turned to mud. The storm roared around them, but he kept walking, his heart beating steady. Mara turned slightly, enough for him to see her face. The rain clung to her lashes, tracing down her cheeks like tears. Her expression was unreadable, neither joy nor sorrow, but something deeper, a quiet release. And then, without a word, she began to walk down the path leading back toward the valley. Illy followed from a distance. They moved together through the storm, two souls bound by the same loss, but walking separate roads of redemption. The thunder rolled above, and the lightning flashed behind them, illuminating the world in fleeting, brilliant bursts. When they reached the river again, Mara stopped. She knelt beside the half-finished painting, her fingers brushing across the surface. She opened her satchel and took out her paints, already wet from the rain. Without hesitation, she began to work. Fast, deliberate, as if the storm itself had given her strength. Illy watched in silence as the final strokes came to life beneath her hands. The two figures, Clara and Mara, stood side by side, their hands almost touching. And in that last space between them, Mara painted a third figurally, not as he was now, but as he once had been, alive, unbroken, smiling beside the woman he loved. The rain washed over the canvas, softening the colors, blending them together until the painting seemed alive. The storm's fury began to fade, and the world fell quiet again. When the last stroke was done, Mara set the brush down. The wind slowed, the river calmed, and a strange peace settled over the land. Illy understood now. The painting wasn't meant to replace Clara's memory. It was meant to complete it. Through Mara's hand, Clara had spoken one final truth. Love never dies, it only changes form. Mara stood, her face pale but calm. The burden she had carried for years seemed to lift, her shoulders easing for the first time since she had arrived at his ranch. The storm had taken her pain, the river her silence. Illy turned his gaze toward the sky, where the clouds broke open to reveal the first stars of night. The rain glittered on the surface of the river like shards of glass, and for a moment he could almost hear Clara's laughter in the wind, faint and warm, mingling with the sound of the water. Mara looked once more at the painting, then at Illy. Her eyes carried the softness of farewell. She gathered her things slowly, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. The air between them was heavy not with words, but with understanding. She began to walk toward the horizon, where the last light lingered. Her figure grew smaller with every step, blending into the endless prairie, until only the faint shape of her shawl could be seen against the setting sun. Illy remained by the river, the finished painting beside him. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool and still. He knelt once more beside Clara's grave and placed the painting at its base. The canvas glowed faintly in the twilight, the colors alive with love and forgiveness. He felt the world settle into silence again, not empty this time, but whole. The house back on the ranch, the portraits, the garden, all of it waited for his return. But for now, he stayed there, listening to the river, the same river where his wife had once painted, and where Mara had brought her spirit back to life. And as the stars brightened above, Illy knew the truth at last. Clara had never really left, and neither had the woman who carried her memory across miles of dust and sorrow. The past had finally met the present, and in that quiet union his heart began to heal. The night deepened. The wind softened, the earth grew still, but somewhere beyond the hills, a faint trail of light flickered in the distance, the glow of a campfire far away. He knew she wasn't gone forever. Their story had one final chapter left to be told. Dawn came quietly to the McGraw ranch, spreading a pale gold light across the valley. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world rinsed clean, sharp and glistening. The river shimmered like silver thread in the early sun, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. It was the kind of morning that seemed to promise something new, though nothing had truly changed, only the heart of the man who now stood watching it unfold. Illy McGraw woke before the sun that morning. For the first time in years he hadn't dreamed of loss. The memories that had haunted him, Clara's laughter fading into silence, the empty chair at the table, the shadows in the kitchen, had softened into something gentle. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was close. The night before, he had stayed long by the river, staring at the painting that Mara had completed under the storm's light. When he finally brought it home, he placed it on the wall where his late wife's portrait once hung. But it was more than a picture. It was a bridge between two lives, between the woman he had loved and the woman who had come bearing her memory. The kitchen felt different now. The morning light fell across the wooden table where Mara used to sit, grinding coffee beans or sketching in the quiet hours. Her presence still lingered there, subtle, like the scent of lavender and paint that refused to fade from the walls. Illy moved through the room slowly, his boots soft against the floorboards, as though afraid to disturb that fragile peace. Outside, the ranch was alive again. The horses moved restlessly in the corral, the chickens clucked in the yard, and the dog, old Briscoe, who had barely stirred since Clara's death, wagged his tail and followed Illy out to the barn. There was work to be done, as there always was. But that morning the chores felt lighter. Illy saddled his horse and rode out to the ridge above the valley. From there he could see the whole stretch of land, rolling hills, scattered pines, and the faint smoke rising from distant cabins. The world was vast, unchanging, eternal. Yet somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, he knew Mara was still traveling. He wondered where the road had taken her. Perhaps she had returned to the small town where she once painted faces of strangers for coin. Or maybe she had gone west, chasing sunsets and silence. Wherever she was, he knew she carried no more burdens. The storm had washed them away, leaving behind only truth, the kind that lived quietly, deep within the soul. Illy dismounted and sat on a flat rock overlooking the plains. The wind tugged gently at his coat, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, a letter Mara had left on his porch before she vanished. He hadn't read it for days, but now, in the calm of the morning, he opened it once more. The handwriting was fine and careful, the ink smudged slightly by tears or rain. Her words spoke of gratitude, of unfinished journeys, and of a promise to return when the world allowed. But what lingered most were her final lines: "When the morning light touches her portrait, know that you are not alone, for love, once given, never fades, it simply changes hands." He folded the letter again and placed it back into his pocket. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the valley, and when he looked toward the ranch house below, he saw it, golden light streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating the portrait on the wall. From that distance, it seemed as though both women, Clara and Mara, were there, one framed in paint, the other in memory. And Illy, for the first time, did not feel divided between them. He had learned that love was not a possession, but a passage. It flowed like the river, changing shape, finding new banks, always moving forward. The seasons turned swiftly in the months that followed. Summer came and went in waves of golden heat, then faded into autumn's quiet hush. The ranch grew busy again, filled with the rhythm of life that Clara had once tended and Mara had revived. The kitchen became a place of warmth once more, its hearth always burning, its windows open to the scent of rain and grain. Sometimes travelers passed through artists, traders, or ranch hands in search of work, and Illy would offer them food and rest. And always their eyes would be drawn to the painting on the wall. They would ask who the women were, and Illy would simply say that they were two souls who had taught him what love meant. In winter, when snow blanketed the plains and the nights stretched long, he would sit by the fire with a cup of coffee and watch the shadows dance across the portrait. The house no longer felt empty. Every room carried an echo of laughter, a trace of paint, a whisper of the life he had thought lost forever. Years passed quietly. The lines on Illy's face deepened, and his hair turned gray, but his eyes held the same warmth they once had. The portrait remained untouched, its colors unfaded. And though he never heard from Mara again, he sometimes felt her presence in the wind that swept down from the hills or the faint shimmer of light on the river. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Illy rode down to the same riverbank where the storm had broken years before. The cross still stood there, though weathered now and moss-covered. The painting had long since been taken to the house, but the memory of that night remained vivid: the rain, the lightning, the sound of brushes against canvas. He sat quietly, letting the wind move through his hair, the water murmur its endless song. Somewhere far away, perhaps in another town, a woman was painting again, her hands steady, her heart light. He imagined her smiling as she worked, And for a moment he smiled too. As dusk settled, Illy turned back toward the ranch. The lights in the windows glowed soft and golden, guiding him home. The world around him had grown quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of grief. It was the peace of acceptance. When he entered the house, the portrait greeted him first. The two women, one from his past, one from his redemption, seemed to watch him with the same calm eyes. The firelight flickered across their painted faces, blending their colors into one soft, endless glow. Illy stood before it, his hat in his hand, and let the moment fill him completely. He felt gratitude, not sorrow. He felt presence, not loss. For in that portrait, both love and memory lived side by side, unchanging, eternal. He turned then and went to stoke the fire. Outside, the stars began to bloom over the plains, vast and silver. The wind carried through the open window, rustling the curtains like gentle laughter. And though no one else could see it, if one looked closely enough at the painting in that light, one might notice something new, the faint outline of another figure in the distance, walking along a riverbank beneath the dawn, her shawl fluttering in the wind, her steps steady, her face turned toward home. Somewhere out there, the road still stretched on, but for Illy McGraw, the journey had found its end. The house was no longer haunted by absence. It was filled with love, the kind that stays, the kind that changes everything.